Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Waste 360 webinar, Beyond Compliance, Future-Proofing Landfill Operations for Emerging Issues, sponsored by Montrose Environmental. I'm Gage Edwards, and I'll be moderating today's event. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. Towards the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type the issue into the Q&A area and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Now, on to the presentation, Beyond Compliance, Future-Proofing Landfill Operations for Emerging Issues. Discussing today's topics are Dave Kempisty, Ph.D., PE, VP of Research and Development Technology, ECT2, and Elizabeth McGurk, Methane Market Sector Leader, Montrose Environmental, and Roberto Gasparini, a Ph.D., CCM, Senior Principal, Spirit Environmental, a big family of Montrose Environmental pairings today for today's presentation. But first, we'd like to start off with a poll question. Please choose your response directly on the screen to submit. Here the question is, which emerging issues poses the biggest challenge for your landfill operations? Your answers are odors, methane, PFAS, community relations, or all of the above. I'm going to throw it over to Roberto real quick to talk about some of these answers here.
Sure. Thank you, Gage. As we're getting geared up towards, believe it or not, we're at the end of October. We're gearing up towards the holidays, and I can't help but think of the Charles Dickens classic, A Christmas Carol, right? And the whole ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. And I kind of think about these topics here in terms of, odors are sort of the more traditional pollutant, the ones that began being regulated when the Clean Air Act was first published in 1970. And then jumping over to sort of methane as being sort of the soup du jour. And then now, especially, we're really looking our eye towards PFAS and how we're going to deal with the cleanups and the situation with that. So I think these pollutants are interesting because it really is, it sort of represents the whole range of past, present, and future with regard to how they've been regulated. And so it's a pretty interesting set of topics, I think.
Well, let's check out those results, shall we? Again, the poll question was, which emerging issues poses the biggest challenge for your landfill operations? Looks like at 35%, we have all of the above. And then coming in second place for that is PFAS at 32%, methane at 28% of our answerees, and then community relations at 18% and odors at 13%. Some good information there. That is the first of our poll questions. We'll see another one soon, but I'm going to pass it back over to our Montrose Environmental team for the rest of the presentation.
Cool deal. Thank you so much, Gage. I appreciate it. So I'm going to lead us off today to talk specifically about odors and how litigation is starting to creep into this space. So we all manage, or we're all involved with industrial facilities, or maybe we counsel them or support them in some form or fashion. And so the question around litigation is really a lot like driving. And we drive around all the time, and everything's going smoothly until the cop pulls you over. And that's sort of the comparison that I would say is the world of litigation, right? Is that all of a sudden, you're going along, you're operating your facility, and then all of a sudden you get pulled over by the cops, right? A lawsuit is filed against you. And so I think it's important to think about this within the context of that sort of fearful and scary experience. If you've never had that experience, by the way, congratulations, keep up the great work. However, if you have been pulled over, there's a whole bunch of things that run through your mind. And I think it's a good comparison or a good analogy to think about with regard to what you could be doing as far as managing the information around your facility and being able to have your hands around it to put yourself in the best position to defend yourself should litigation come your way surrounding sort of nuisance conditions or odors around your facility. So I think the first thing that you do if you were to get pulled over is to sort of consider the speed limit and the cars around you. So in that situation, the speed limit sort of represents if you think about it from an air quality standpoint, the speed limit is the limit that you're not supposed to go over. And in air quality, we actually have national ambient air quality standards, or states may have individual thresholds that are promulgated for individual pollutants. And so knowing what those standards are relative to the different pollutants that you emit is very important. And knowing what the regulatory status is of your area relative to those standards is critical. If you're in a non-attainment area, then it is well documented that there's an air quality issue in your region. And is that something that could be used against you, for instance, right? That if you're being sued, then can a plaintiff point to a non-attainment designation as being reflective of a poorer air quality situation around your facility? So understanding what the current situation is relative to non-attainment, understanding what the situation is trending towards in that space. Are you about to get that way, or are you about to get a non-attainment designation? Understanding where things are today and where things are going is really important for knowing your situation. And similarly, understanding the cars around you, understanding, is it possible that somebody else was speeding and that was what triggered the cop's radar gun? Understanding what your nearby industrial neighbors are doing, what they're emitting, if they're potentially causing odors. Are they emitting more than you? Are they emitting less than you? Understanding the situation relative to all of your industrial neighbors is really important context around your own emissions and potentially how it impacts the surrounding community and the potential for any sort of odors and litigation. So your speed limit, what the other cars around you are doing, but the key here is there's some sort of a measurement. There's a radar gun that clocks you, and it's really important to know how good is that measurement. And in the air quality world, we have the disadvantage of the fact that air emissions sort of vanish into the wind and go away, but we do have the ability to take some measurements of air quality. And so the big question here is, what air quality measurements are available, and how good are they? Are we dealing with a situation where there's a well-calibrated radar gun, or is the cop just guessing based on looking at you? Oh, I think you were easily going 100. That's a very unscientific and uncalibrated approach. And similarly, in the air quality measurement world, there are regulatory monitors that are very sophisticated and collect very, very good data. But then there are also, and we're seeing more and more of this, there are a lot of very low cost budget monitors that are being put throughout communities. And are those starting to collect data that are developing a record that might point to air quality issues in the area, and is that the kind of data that could be used to suggest that you and your facility are the cause of those issues? And so understanding what's happening offsite relative to the measurements of the air quality, are the data very near your facility, for example, or are they being collected 10 miles away where there's some situation where there's no way that it would be accurately reflecting what you yourself might be emitting? And then are there other potential sources that are biasing or impacting those measurements? I'm based out of Houston, Texas, and here in Houston, we had a famous regulatory monitor that was monitoring non-attainment for particulate matter for a little while. And then, and it was all because there was an unpaved parking lot that tractor trailers would use right adjacent to that monitor. And so they went in and paved that lot. And next thing you know, their quality measurements go way down and it starts to monitor attainment again. again at that monitor, and it's all came from paving that parking lot. And so understanding the situation around those monitors is critical to understanding whether or not they are legitimately pointing to some sort of an issue that you might be causing, or they could be speaking to something entirely different. So just like those are sources of data and information that come from offsite, do you have any on-site information? Just like we drive around and we have the option, some insurance companies let you put that little plug in, that little driving tracker on your car. And some people decide, oh, that would be great. I definitely want that data collected. And some people say there's no way on earth that I'm going to let that data be collected. And similarly, whether or not you collect data from your own site in the form of air quality measurements, that's a complicated question. And it's something that a lot of different stakeholders could be involved in. And so to collect or not to collect air quality data on your own site, whether it's through fence line monitoring or using some sort of sensors on site, or even full-fledged instruments that are just as good as what the regulators would use. Those are all legitimate questions that could and should be discussed in terms of any kind of data collection on your own site. And then, beyond direct air quality measurements, are you conducting any sort of odor control surveys, whether it's on your own site, or are you going around in the community and routinely driving either a set route or a set series of routes to be able to identify if there are any potential odors that are emanating offsite, and to identify if your own operations are contributing to that situation? The better a grasp that you have around what the actual odor situation is on the ground, the better position you'll be in to be able to protect yourself against litigation in that space, and to be able to proactively manage your own operations in order to minimize any sort of offsite impacts. Because at the end of the day, that's what we all want to do. We want to have as little of a negative impact offsite as possible. So understanding your own data is important, but with respect to specific measurements, there are the measurements of air quality, but then there's also the narrative or the story about your own background. And just like a cop is going to pull you over and run your plates or run your driver's license to find out if you're a repeat offender or if you're a routine speeder, the same situation shows up here. In that if somebody is looking at your facility, they're going to go to the environmental records at the regulator, and they're going to find out if you have a permit, for example, to an air permit, because an air permit is going to tell the world that you're authorized to put some sort of an air pollutant into the air that necessarily is leaving the site. So that air permit is your authorization to do that. Similarly, you may actually file emissions inventory reports where you are self-reporting how much you are putting into the air based on your actual operations. And I've seen this a million times. When it comes to regulatory filings, a lot of times compliance folks will sort of round up or take a high-end ballpark, or tend to be conservative in their estimates of emissions, because at the end of the day, as long as it's within the permit limits, that's all fine and good, and it's an authorized and appropriate emissions level. However, just because it fits within your permit, if it still represents an overestimate of your air emissions, then I can tell you that if plaintiffs' attorneys are looking at your facility as possibly causing a nuisance situation, if you over-report your own emissions, then they're going to use that over-reported number in any sort of evaluation that they put together, painting you as being a high emitter, or doing any sort of air dispersion modeling to show, they're going to generate these maps that show all these impacts in the surrounding community. And to the extent that you are overestimating your emissions, that information, even though it's permissible, might come back to haunt you. And so I would caution you, if you're self-reporting emissions, to be careful about being accurate with that and not being so flippant about overestimating or coming in conservative when it comes to your historical emissions. They're going to look at your violations. If you have repeated violations, that's definitely going to raise a red flag or identify you as a potential target for litigation. And then you may have heard of Freedom of Information Act requests, where or a FOIA request, where you can or a citizen can put in this public information request and get all of the public data relative to your facility. Well, I had an attorney friend of mine tell me that you can actually put in a FOIA request yourself for your own facility on who has put in FOIA requests on you. And I think it's a fantastic idea because it helps you to identify whether somebody might be targeting you for potential litigation. So you yourself can file a FOIA request to see if anybody else is filing FOIA requests on you. And I think that's a great idea and something that you should think about doing. I will admit, I'm a meteorologist. I always think about weather conditions, and so I'm a little surprised that it took me 5 points to get down to weather. But I think weather's an important consideration because what the weather situation was it sunny? Is it wet? All of those conditions speak to how your facility is being operated. If you have a prevailing wind direction, then it could suggest that there's a part of the community or there's a surrounding area that's more frequently affected than others. And so how well do you know your weather situation? Do you collect your own weather data on site? Is there a National Weather Service station off-site that is close enough and representative enough of your weather situation to where you could trust that for any kind of weather information? So knowing what available weather data is really, really important and could inform whether or not you want to collect your own data because there's just not anything that's good enough off-site. And then the conditions that are being observed. If it's particularly wet, then that contributes to decay and that contributes to odors. And so what can you be doing during unusual weather conditions in order to mitigate those impacts? These are all questions that are really important to take into account whenever you're operating because you, again, want to minimize any sort of negative impact off-site. And then, lastly, I would say consider how the neighbors view you. Just like if you were to get pulled over in your own neighborhood, everybody, when a cop car is on my street, goodness gracious, I go outside and I'm curious as to what's going on. And the fundamental question is are they going to look at you and say, well, it's about time that you got your bell rung and that the cops got their hands on you? Or are they going to say, I can't believe it. That company is a good member of our community. The workers live here. They're always involved in public relations events. They sponsor Little League teams. They're a good neighbor. And is the community going to be shocked so that if lawyers come around trying to file some sort of a nuisance lawsuit against you, they'll find that everybody in the community would say, no way, I'm not going to sign up in a lawsuit against them. We love that company. We love that they're here in the community. Because if they respond that way, then the attorneys are going to pick up and they're going to move to a different target and they're going to leave you alone. But if you are routinely causing odors off-site and you don't have a good public perception within the community, well, then people will say, well, where do I sign, right? Because, and especially if it's in an area that's in a lower socioeconomic status, the opportunity to get some easy money might be attractive to them, particularly if you're not a particularly good neighbor. And so understanding the public perception is really important as well, because it speaks to the likelihood or the unlikelihood of litigation being filed against you. So hopefully these are all things that you don't want to wait until a lawsuit is filed against you. Hopefully these are all things that you could be thinking about or getting your hands around today so that you can proactively and preemptively protect yourself should litigation come your way. So with that, Gage, I'll kick it back to you for the next poll question and take it from there.
Thank you, Roberto. Yes, we do have another poll question. So everybody watching at home or to your office, please choose your response directly on the screen and click submit. We're going to run through this. The question is, do you currently use continuous air or gas monitoring technology on site? Our answers here are yes, no, or planning to in 2026. We'll give everyone attending a chance to answer this. And I'll pass it back over to Montrose Environmental in case anyone wants to speak on this quickly.
Thanks, Gage. Just FYI, your mic is whistling again. So heads up on that. Looking forward to seeing the audience's response to this question because it's especially pertinent to the issue that I'm going to be talking about here momentarily, which is changes regarding monitoring options for methane emissions from landfills. It's like we've got about a quarter of the attendees who've responded so far. So again, this question is, are you currently employing any continuous monitoring on your site, or are you planning to do so in 2026? Right, we'll wait for a few more questions or a few more respondents while we also wait for Gage to rejoin and read the answers, hopefully.
All right, I'm back. Hopefully that whistle's gone.
I think so.
All right, cool. Just in time to pass it over to the results here. And our question again was, do you currently use continuous air or gas monitoring technology on site? 56% of people here today answered no, while 36% answered yes, and 7% answered planning to in 2026. That's where we are. I will pass it back over to the team to kind of go over this and move on to our next slide.
Perfect. All right. Thanks for that, Gage. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your time today. My name is Elizabeth McGurk, and I am the methane sector lead at Montrose. I'm going to be completely honest with you all in that my background is really in the oil and gas industry, and I am learning the landfill industry now. And the reason I am is because we're seeing a shift in how the industry is being regulated with respect to methane emissions. Landfills are no stranger to why methane emissions matter, but what we're seeing now is people talking about methane for a different reason. The language is shifting. We're talking about methane because of its potential impacts on climate change. We're talking about methane because technology has evolved such that we can see methane from space. And so it's becoming more important to stakeholders than it's been previously. And as a result, we're seeing that interest from stakeholders spill over into our regulatory space. So my hope is to talk to you about what's causing that shift, what different options you're seeing, and also opportunities to learn from the oil and gas industry, which saw some of these regulatory shifts first. So we can use them as a bit of a bellwether and also a way to prepare ourselves for what's coming. So a little bit of context here. Why landfills? Why are we regulating methane and specifically methane monitoring from the landfill industry? And the reason is, if you look at the United States methane emissions, landfills are the third largest source of methane emissions. So there's something that is contributing materially to our footprint. Methane accumulates underground and then is collected in a gas system and then can either be sent for other use or to a flare. However, if it is not collected and sent to a control system or routed for other use, it emits to atmosphere, contributing to air emissions. That can be seen from space. Landfills have shown up on aerial technologies now for methane emissions, which is leading to renewed attention. Beyond that, methane that is entrapped or is not collected correctly can lead to other concerns at landfills as well, from heating underground, ultimately causing fire or other safety and environmental concerns. So where does that leave us? Basically, it leads us at the land of new regulations. And what we're seeing is really a slew of new methane monitoring related regulations being proposed at a state level. We have a limited amount of time together today, so I really am just highlighting one particular example of what we're seeing in California, but I want to talk about how we're seeing similar initiatives in other states, and also whether we might see this on a federal level at some point as well. So specifically, if we look at California, the California Air Resource Board, or CARB, they have proposed changes to their landfill methane reg, or the LMR. Those changes are summarized on this slide. In summary, they're saying that there are going to be stricter leak monitoring thresholds and timelines, saying that both the definition of what is a leak is going to be lower and the timeline for addressing it will be shorter. They are saying that you have to plan ahead for contingencies like infrastructure downtime. If a flare or other pollution control system is offline, you need to be prepared and have a system in place to manage what happens to your emissions during that time. Interestingly, they are allowing for adoption of mobile and remote detection. You're seeing the technologies that can be used to both detect and measure methane emissions are increasing at a very, very rapid pace, driven by changes that have led to increased public pressure and just the way that technology develops. And the regulations are starting to catch up. So regulations like this CARB update are saying, we recognize that there are different ways to address this problem now than may have existed previously. So we're inviting you to expand your toolbox and use different technologies to either monitor more frequently or to monitor things that were previously difficult to monitor, or to look at things more often than you did previously. And then, because you're collecting more data, they're asking you to report more data and send it to your regulator for review, and to basically share the performance of your facility. What are you seeing? What are your impacts? What are your mitigation options? So this is happening specifically in California, and it's one half of two separate regulatory efforts in California right now. One is this LMR proposed revision that's looking at technology and repair, and another one is a kind of a sister regulation also associated with landfills and mitigating risk, where you are monitoring more frequently for elevated temperatures because of the issues that can be involved with that. Similarly, other states are changing their landfill regulations as well with respect to methane monitoring options. Oregon is making changes that allow you to use advanced technologies like pairing an aerial technology with more traditional on-the-ground methods. Maryland, Washington doing the same thing, saying you can use optical gas imaging or aerial detection methods that they want paired with traditional on-the-ground method 21. And Colorado has a really interesting one that is a proposed rule. It's been delayed and they're going to be voting on it in December. But it does not only allow advanced technologies like your aerial drones and satellites, it requires it, but it also has requirements wrapped in for non-combustion methane destruction or capture options as well. So what you're seeing is a statewide approach to landfill regulations with respect to methane emissions. But I think what's important to understand, and something that we can take away from when looking at the oil and gas industry, is the continuum of monitoring options that are available to us right now. We're living in a very exciting time where technology is developing really rapidly, and we're figuring out how to best use it and how to use it to improve our operations, to reduce our emissions, But we need to understand the limitations and opportunities associated with the technologies that we're using. So traditionally, landfills and other industries as well would use method 21 for their leak detection program. You might hear this called method 21. You might hear it called a sniffer. It's essentially taking a wand and reading a localized concentration of methane. You only find what you're looking for. As you move across this triangle to the right, what you're going to see is opportunities and technologies that allow you to see larger swaths of area at one time at a lower resolution. And so what you can do is pair technologies together to monitor continuously, or to do a screening model to identify high-level issues before you investigate more closely on the ground. And it really allows you to build a program that can be customized to your site and gather information on what's happening at your location, hopefully before somebody else does, so that you can start to address your issues. And I do think it's nice to see the regulations changing to allow you to use some of these technologies that are available now, rather than being limited to how, you know, LDAR programs or leak detection programs were put together in the past. Just as a quick data point and aside is, if you're looking just even at the two left-hand sides here, comparing method 21 to optical gas imaging, that's the sniffer to a camera. OGI allows you to look at, let's see here, about 10 to 20 times more area and potential leak points in the same amount of time than method 21. So you can look at things more frequently and at less expense. Okay, and then before passing it over to the next poll question, I just wanted to finish with one takeaway about methane management, is that monitoring is really only one small piece of this puzzle. When you're putting together a methane management program, you need to consider that there's a lot of pieces that are all integrated together here. It's going to impact your reporting. It's going to impact how you're interacting with your community around you as you're gathering more data. It's definitely, with respect to these state regulations, going to impact your permitting and compliance and what reports you have to follow. So just as you're building your program, think about how things are going to overlap and ensure that you are ready to go in implementing your data and using it wherever you can within your operations. All right, Gage, I'm going to pass it over to you for the next poll question.
Okay, and hopefully things are working on my end now. No, still whistling. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to pass over to Philip then, and I will join back in. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem, Gage. My name's Philip, and I'm just going to ask this question here on an interim basis. Are you currently treating your leachate prior to discharge? Again, that's our next poll question. If you guys would mind filling it out or clicking on the options. A is yes, B is no, and C is planning to in 2026. Again, the question is, are you currently treating your leachate prior to discharge?
And just for clarification, just recognizing it now, Philip, I was hoping that that was going to be intended for, are you currently treating your leachate for PFAS prior to discharge?
Got it. Thank you, Dave, for that clarification. Let's see, we're up to about 35, 37 individuals. We appreciate everybody's participation and joining us today. We're now up to about 40. We're going to wait till we hit about 50 or so, and then we will see what the results are. And then we're going to hand it over to Dave Kempisty. Just a couple more minutes. And while we're waiting for Gage to get back on, and I will hand the moderator back over to Gage here. Moderation, I guess I should say. All right, just another few seconds, a few more responses, and we will see what the results are showing. right, I think we're good. Dave, I'm going to go ahead and why don't we look at the results here? So results right here, are you currently treating your leachate prior to discharge? With 69.4%, we have no at this time. We have 24.5%, about a quarter of our viewers say yes, and a very small amount, 6.1%, is planning to in 2026. So I think that's a great segue to hand this over to you, Dave, if you're all set.
I am all set. Thanks, Philip. Yeah, and those results are somewhat expected. I think there would be more, perhaps, positive responses for sampling analysis and monitoring your leachate, but treatment is probably pretty early days at this point in time. But by way of introduction, my name's Dave Kempisty. I'm Vice President of Technology for ECT2. And in that role, I work in research and development, and I take cool concepts, the bright ideas, and transition them into see if they are viable in the commercial space. Is there a need for this? Is it timely? And that's a really cool role. And we do a lot of work with landfills and with PFAS, sometimes with landfills without PFAS as well. And I have a picture of a book that I had the honor of editing, and I actually did 2 books. And leading off, I see, and both of these books kind of talk about PFAS in this way, that there's this nexus of toxicology, analytical limitations and challenges, treatment capacity, treatment trains, and policy or regulations. And all of these 4 venues are progressing at a different rate, but they're all influencing one another. So, for instance, as toxicological findings are brought to the forefront and you understand that there are adverse health effects associated with these chemicals, new policy would emerge. As analytical detection limits get lower and lower, again, policy might require you to get to these lower levels, or technology might reach a limitation and be unable to reach these lower limits of detection. Or on the analytical spectrum, you can talk about water, and that is not necessarily an analytical challenge. But when you start to get to solid matrices, or you start to get to ultra short chains, or you start to get to the air matrix, a little bit more challenges associated with that on the analytical side. And the toxicological profile is not as well developed, and therefore the policy is not as well developed. This first slide talks about policy. And so I broke it into 2 different implications, or 2 different categories there: federal and then state initiatives. And on the federal side, and I took the liberty of assuming that most people know what PFAS are. And if you don't, I got a really good book for you to read. But PFAS and the implications on the federal side, there are a variety of different legislative measures in place and potentially pending. And so CERCLA is the Superfund legislation, and there is a CERCLA designation as a hazardous substance for these 2 chemicals called PFOA and PFOS. And what that does is it triggers a variety of things, but there are reportable quantities that if you are involved or know of a spill, or your facility is involved in a release to the environment above a certain quantity, then you must report it within a certain time frame. But it also allows the federal government to pursue potentially responsible parties for cleanup, liability for these cleanup operations after you release these chemicals into the environment. Additionally, it unlocks federal Superfund revenue and resources to clean up these sites, and you do not have to have and show immediate and substantial justification for adverse health effects. These chemicals have been designated as hazardous substances, and as such, they are eligible for Superfund sites, Superfund funds. It also classifies these chemicals under the Department of Transportation as hazardous materials, and there are follow-on implications associated with that. So now that you're transiting on the open roads, hazardous materials, you can see that transportation costs, hauling costs would go up, and if there were a release to the environment during transportation, there will be follow-on liability and costs and cleanup associated with that. that exists today. CERCLA designation as a hazardous substance. RCRA designation is for a hazardous waste. PFOA, PFAS, no PFAS, the whole family, is designated as a hazardous waste today. They are designated as hazardous constituents, which is kind of a, no pun intended, but a precursor to hazardous waste. If this were to pass, I think there would be a lot of litigious activity to confront this, and it has not passed, but this is something that may occur. A lot of attention is being given to it. There's another act, the Clean Water Act, and there are effluent limitation guidelines that are cited in, that cite specifically certain industries in the United States, two of which are landfills and centralized waste treatment facilities. And they have cited that there are releases that PFAS has been implicated in centralized waste treatment facilities and landfills. Study is ongoing for the CWTs, but they have decided that the rulemaking process should begin, has entered into the rulemaking phase for controlling PFAS releases from landfills. So this is coming. That can be handled through a variety of different, two mainly, control mechanisms, NEPDES permits, and the Industrial Pretreatment Program. Coming, Clean Water Act, effluent limitation guidelines. And then finally, I've got MCLs. Now, those are for drinking water, but the reason I put them on here is just that there will be upstream pressure. If you are discharging to a drinking water source, if you're putting effluent into the Great Lakes, for instance, the limitations are going to be rather strict, and we'll look forward to seeing more pressure. But in the interim, you'll see much more initiatives from the state level. So it's somewhat piecemeal, but you'll have a lot of sampling analysis and monitoring is being conducted, is being regulated or required by the states listed parenthetically here. Other states have implemented successfully. In particular, I'm thinking about Michigan, this industrial pretreatment program. And so you've seen reductions of PFAS being released to the environment through the industrial pretreatment program. So, and additionally, the feds have encouraged the states to incorporate PFAS limits into their NEPDES permits. So all that to say, regulations are pending and approaching. Generally, regulations get tighter, not looser. You know, there may be lower limits treatment objectives, and there may be expanded PFAS constituents that you need to control. Now, the good news is there are effective solutions. And so this is where ECT2 really comes in my role is finding solutions to remove these chemicals from the environment. Absorptive media can work. However, it is met with some challenges, especially when you're treating landfill leachate. Landfill leachate, very difficult matrix. And so another technology that we found and have used effectively is foam fractionation. So I say successfully demonstrated, but really this is continuously operating. It's more than demonstrated. We're running today as we speak. At full scale, 15-foot reactors, 80,000 gallons per day, 24/7. And essentially this technology leverages the surfactant properties of PFAS. So PFAS has this hydrophobic tail associated with it. It wants to be out of the water, and it has a water-loving hydrophilic portion to it. And that wants to be in the water. And so if you had that air-water interface, like a bubble, like foam, and you created all this foam by introducing large volumes of water of air in the bottom of a reactor, the PFAS would migrate to that foam, and then you remove the foam, collapse the foam, and deal with the residuals. It does struggle with shorter chain PFAS, so there are some limitations associated with it, but we've got some workarounds to that. But what it really does, and why it does so well in landfill applications, is that it avoids the excessive pre-treatment that is required. Landfill leachate's a really difficult matrix with loads of organics and metals and total suspended solids, VOCs. You can do away with a lot of the pre-treatment and just go straight to a foam fractionation technology, which is why we've seen this be quite applicable to the landfill space. You do have to optimize it, and landfill leachate isn't really a consistent waste stream all the time. And so you have to figure out your air injection rates and how to adjust your hydraulic retention times, and if there are additive agents that needed to be added. So we've done a lot of that and learned a lot of that. And then you have these residuals that you need to deal with. So you're taking this landfill, this forward flow, and maybe about 5% down to about 0.5%, somewhere in that range. You're going to have all the PFAS put into this foam. What are you going to do with that foam? Well, it's very well suited as an off-ramp for a destructive technology. So PFAS destruction technologies all need this volume reducing and concentration increasing step. The fomate is that step. That's that preparatory step for a destruction effort. Alternatively, if you didn't want to go to a destruction mechanism, you can load it onto solid phase media. And we call it superloading. So it's a patented technology, and we've got this mixed media solution. And again, lower volumes, highly concentrated, long contact times, and we can load it onto this solid phase media. And we'll take the effluent from that and we'll push it back to the forefront of the treatment works. So now you have a zero liquid discharge from your PFAS treatment system at your landfill, which is a difficult treatment process to get around. And then you have it all loaded onto the solid phase. What do you do with solid waste? I don't know, maybe put it in a solid waste facility like a landfill where you're treating. So it really makes a lot of sense. Now, does it leach off that landfill? That's what we're doing preliminary testing on right now, and we do have some results on that I'd be happy to share if folks were interested. And I've got one line here talking about new technologies, and so we have Nanosorb and EFLOC listed here, but these are novel methods utilizing existing treatment, so you don't have a high capital cost associated with putting these treatment technologies online. And what this allows you to do is using this, it creates or uses the flock, be it biologically or chemically induced flock, to trap PFAS. And then we're using physical chemical processes to remove PFAS from landfill leachate. Smaller flows, this works really well. And we've had great success with this in the Denmark European market using both Nanosorb and EFLOC. Final slide, this looks towards what we've done and what we've learned. And so for foam fractionation, it really is an ideal design for difficult matrices like landfill leachate. You can have future resiliency, and we call it future proofing, because you can put resin on the backside to treat a smaller volume and remove and get to the treatment objectives that are needed and remove shorter chain compounds if that is required. And you've got this fomate that is produced that is the off-ramp for a destructive technology. Or, you have to go in with eyes wide open and understand how you're going to handle those residuals. And that is accomplished by, again, superloading onto media. And then you can put that back into your landfill without having to worry about it being released back into the environment. One more bullet on the value of treatability tests. I listed it out here as crawl, walk, run. So this is the idea that you would do bench scale, followed by pilot scale, followed by full scale. And it's very valuable to do this because you gain confidence that the treatment technology is going to work for your particular water, for your particular treatment objectives. And we gain confidence that what we're proposing is going to work as well. But they're relatively low in cost and quick to have turnaround time results. And so always promote treatability tests. So finally, just that call out box there, regulations are coming, but effective scalable treatment technology is achievable today. The key is matching the technology with where we see regulations going and trying to stay ahead of that regulatory curve. And with that, I will open this up to any questions, or who's our moderator at this point in time? Gage.
I'm hoping it's me. Do I sound okay?
You do?
Okay, cool. Wow. What a mess. All right, I apologize for that. Yes, we're going to step over to the Q&A session part of the webinar. Before we begin today's Q&A, please direct your attention to our webinar survey, available on the right of the presentation window. If you close the survey, simply reopen the widget by clicking on the clipboard icon along the bottom of your screen. Thank you in advance for filling out the feedback form. Participation in the survey allows us to better serve you for future webinars. Now, we're going to move on to the question and answer portion of our event. As a reminder, let's see, to participate in the Q&A, just type your question into the text box located to the left of the presentation window and click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If we are not able to answer your question or answer all submitted questions today during the webinar, we'll be sure to share them with our speakers who can apply to offline. With that, I'm going to look at the little box here and see what we've got. So I'm going to start with Roberto. Roberto, I have a question for you that says, what is the one thing that I can do today in order to decrease my risk of litigation being filed against me?
Yeah, good question. I would say the big thing to focus on there is understanding the data that are around you, right? So understanding what the typical conditions are as far as, you know, wind direction and wind speeds and areas that are more likely to be affected or impacted in particularly stable meteorological conditions. So like early morning times, whenever you would see sort of, you know, whenever fog would develop, those are also the same times whenever any sort of odors or any emissions would also hover near the ground and not mix out and dilute. And so I think everybody could understand what the prevailing wind situation is around their facility. And then understand if there are areas that would be more likely to be affected, and then figure out if there are things that you can be doing to minimize those impacts. I think getting your hands around your own weather situation, I would say, is something that you should do today.
Elizabeth, my next question is for you. Should we expect any changes to federal landfill methane monitoring requirements to either allow or require emerging technologies like OGI, drone, or other aerial techniques?
That's a really good question, Gage. Right this moment, the EPA is not doing much in terms of writing new regulations. However, what we have seen is that there is a willingness to allow for flexibility and applying new technologies that work well. So like if you look at the latest batch of oil and gas rules, they were written in a way that allow operators to propose new or different technologies so long as some minimum thresholds for detection are being met. So I would expect that future rulemaking would probably allow for that. And I would encourage any operators who are looking to implement new or emerging technologies to advocate to the regulators for those options, citing studies and also citing the benefit of having federal regulations align with state regulations whenever possible.
Now, David, you spoke about Plan 16 and ELGs coming for landfills. Is there a timeline for that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. They have some soft language that's in there, which is similar to Elizabeth's answer. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of forward action from EPA right now on preliminary Plan 16. And the soft language is the EPA or the agency intends to accomplish everything cited in preliminary Plan 16, but it is at the discretion of the administration and is affected by the budget and the priorities of the agency. So pretty soft language, no timetables associated with it, which then pushes you to the state-by-state piecemeal regulation, which is what we've seen in the past. And so you'll have states act before you'll have the federal agencies act.
All right. The next question here says, what's the removal efficiency on PFAS using foam fraction for long, short, and ultra short PFAS?
Can I give the engineering answer? It depends.
Of course, you guys.
So it depends on the water source. For long chain, very confident we can get to 97, 98, 99% removal efficiency for long chain PFAS. For shorter chain compounds like PFHXA, PFBS, you can use a variety of different chemical additives, boosting agents, and different dosings, and you can get to concentrations 60, 70%. For short chain, it's going to be PFBA and shorter, C4 and shorter. It's going to be difficult. We've seen some success with adding those same additives, and you can get to 40 and 50%, but consistently doing that, and that's for PFBA. We haven't seen any success with the shorter chain compounds other than that. So, and then I guess I would go towards, you would run your foam fractionation unit, and if you wanted to get short chains, now you've removed all the long chains. Now you go to a media-based solution. The media solution isn't going to be consumed with consuming the long chains or removing the long chains, and the media can focus on the short chains, whereas the foam fractionation focused on the long chains, and you have a treatment train, if you will.
Great. The next question says, regarding the crawl, walk, run approach, can you comment on test beds for water analysis?
Can you comment on the test beds for water analysis? Yeah, I mean, crawl, walk, run approach is bench followed by pilot followed by full scale. And if you want to get to, initial bench tests, you can do that with smaller volumes of water. And so maybe 5 to 55 gallons, of water, 200 liters, and you can run a bench scale demonstration. I think that is capable of being accomplished rather easily, and you're working on it at your benchtop. When you get to the pilot, then you really need to have that early adopter or that customer involved, and you're on the site and you're demonstrating the technology, and you have a pathway forward to, commercialization. So that's where, if you were an academic, you would want to partner with somebody like ECT2 and move in that manner, or a grant funding mechanism like CERTIP or ESTCP, and the academic institution can then partner with a larger facility, an ECT2 or a landfill operator, or both, and then you could do the pilot through a grant mechanism like that.
My next question here says, what sort of PFAS concentrations are being proposed for NPDES permits?
Case by case and sector by sector. And, 1 microgram would be very high and 4 nanograms would be very low. Depends where you're discharging to. So I mentioned Michigan, right? And I think Michigan's levels are maybe 12 or 11 or 12 is kind of their low level, because you're discharging to the Great Lakes, which is a source of drinking water. But in other locations, it could be higher. So that one would vary quite a bit, I think.
Okay. Can you describe in more detail superloading?
And so superloading is the ability to get to that zero liquid discharge component that I talked about, but essentially we're using mixed media, and that means granular activated carbon, novel media, organoclays, ion exchange resins, combinations thereof, long holding times, long empty bed contact times. And so you're just nearing isotherm conditions, loading this media up long periods of time, but it's just a small volume of water that you have to treat. So you can do this. And then you've loaded all of that, you've taken the PFAS out of that foam and put it onto that solid media. And then you've got clean water coming out the backside. Maybe it's not 100% clean. That's why you put it back to the headworks of the plant. So say it's, say it's 2%. Now you're treating 102% of your influent instead of 100%. So you're not having any discharges to the environment, and all your PFAS is on the media, and then you dispose of the media into a solid waste facility like the landfill.
All right. Well, hey, thank you guys again for being here today. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Before we sign off for today, I'd like to thank our presenters one last time, David, Elizabeth, and Roberto, as well as our sponsor, Montrose Environmental. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may have not been able to listen to the event. Thank you so much for attending, and everyone have a wonderful remainder of your day. Thank you.